Hey, everyone.
Hey, Cameron.
Hey, thanks for having us. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Yeah, and
Okay, guys.
so I've joined on my computer with the Impact Finance Twitter account, but I don't see it on my phone. I don't know why that's not registering. So that might not work. So if anyone wants to follow, our accounts, they can find it through my bio anyways. So that's not a big deal.
Yes, I'll shout you guys out multiple times as new people join. And I'll also, whilst you're answering a question, figure out how to tag one of those tweets into this space because I know you can do that. I'll figure
Sure.
that out afterwards. But okay, cool. So I think what would obviously this is going to be recorded and uploaded to YouTube, so we can utilize it afterwards and share it around wherever. Hopefully, more people join as we speak. But if not, I think we could get started in a second and yeah, and just sort of like chat a little bit about what inTheory is, what you guys are up to, and how we can collaborate.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it.
Cool. So just for those guys who are listening who normally are expecting Jelani right now, he is currently in a situation where he was without power. So I'm taking the reins from him today, just for today. He'll be back next week. Um, and today we have inTheory or Impact Finance or DeSci Impact. So guys, can you, before you go too deep, can you just introduce yourselves and the project and explain the kind of difference in the names?
Sure thing. Yeah. So my name is Brett, and I'm here with Cameron. We're co-founders of Impact Finance. And Impact Finance's goal from the beginning has always been to make investing in high impact causes a much more interactive and enjoyable experience. And we're obviously leaning into Web3 to achieve that. And we have our first platform that is launching now next month that is called inTheory, which is our DeSci funding platform that really allows users to learn about, engage with, and fund scientific research by collecting generative art NFTs inspired by various research projects. So the reasoning for the difference in names is, Impact Finance is the company. inTheory is really our first platform in what we hope is going to be a flourishing ecosystem of related platforms for various different causes.
Okay, cool.
Cameron, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having us. So Brett and I founded Impact Finance a little under a year ago, and I think one of the big impetuses for myself was I had worked for years in financial services and largely Fortune 500 companies, and I realized how broken our financial infrastructure is in so many ways, and I think we've all been witness to some of the stresses that have taken place over the last couple months, even in TradFi. I've been really passionate about using DeFi and Web3 to essentially engage people into what I think is a super important part of our economy, which is the scientific economy. And coming from my background, I'm not a scientist, and I think bridging this gap between non-scientists to bring them into science in a way that's engaging and exciting and allows people to actually have input into how science is conducted. I think that's what the reason I'm here and reason why I believe in impact finance and inTheory. So I'm really excited to get into some of the details today with everyone and share some of the exciting updates that Brett even alluded to.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the intro. And yeah, it's really interesting to hear that you guys. So, Brett, are you also not from a scientific background? Is that right?
I am from a scientific background, actually. My undergrad degree was chemical engineering, and then I got a master's in computational material science, and that's really what introduced me to the world of, using computer and digital tools to really achieve real world tangible results. And the the natural progression then led me into DeSci.
Yeah. It's always interesting to see how people arrive at the DeSci space, right? So, like yourself, Cameron, I'm also not a scientist, but Jelani is, like Brett. So there's this nice sort of like emulsion of people who are in or out of science, but coming to DeSci to find some mutual interests here. So I think obviously you mentioned your mutual interest was investing in science and opening it up so that people can fund impactful projects. But what in particular about the Web3 space kind of inspired you to go into it? Like, you know, investing in science is one part of it, but what about Web3 implementations of impact finance is kind of what brought you here?
Yeah. So, it used to be and still to most degrees is that anyone with a bank account can participate in maybe funding science, or in the US, you have to even go a step further and be an accredited investor. But Web3 makes it so anyone with just an internet connection can contribute to and participate in the scientific process. And if you're living in the United States like we are, it's like, oh well, everyone has an internet connection is maybe the first thing you think of, but that's just so not true. And that difference from going from anyone with a bank account to anyone with an internet connection really does open up the door to so many different types and new types of people to actually participate in it. So that was one of the first reasons. The other bit is just so much of what we do in science is now governed and controlled by digital technologies, and Web3 is really the best way or best tool that we have right now to make sure that those digital technologies are verifiable, shareable in a fair way, and more open access through a community of interested people. So for me, those are the big tools for why Web3 is so important for science. I got into the space originally because I was working for a nanomaterials startup, and I was in 2021, I was going through to a bunch of different material science conferences, kind of doing a bit of a tour de conference for the product we were launching. And the pervasive theme that I heard in every single talk I went to was just, how these data silos amongst the material science field were just really handicapping all of the researchers, and causing a lot of people to redo efforts, and just really hampering the space in general. And I heard that so often that, this is right around the time that I was really starting to get more involved in crypto as well, that I'm like, there's got to be an obvious solution to this obvious problem. And that's when I fervently started typing on my phone into my notes on my red-eye flight home, like, what if we could link IP to NFTs and digital tokens and spread them amongst the community? And as soon as I landed, I Googled, is anyone doing that? Is this a thing yet? And I was pleased to find, Molecule Vita DAO had already, been spreading that idea for, the previous year. And at that point, I was too far into the rabbit hole to ever escape. So that's really what brought me here.
Yeah, great. It's interesting that you sort of specifically were thinking of the IP NFT and then obviously tried to see if it was out there. This sort of open source nature doesn't require you to do your own make your own protocol, right? It requires you to tack onto the protocol that's already been built. That sort of economy of abundance style way of doing things. Is that something that you've sort of kind of been exposed to much before in your previous businesses, or is that unique, do you think, to the Web3 space?
No, I come from a world of various startups that I've worked in where, everything we did, we had to sign an NDA, and every single, I had to sign an agreement essentially saying that any idea that I had while working at that company, whether it had to do with the work or not, was owned by the company. There were just these things that were just so encouraging of these silos that as soon as I stepped into the world of Web3 and refi and Gitcoin, and it's eye-opening, and it's a whole new experience. And for me, there's no going back.
Yeah, for sure. Go on, and Cameron, I want to ask your opinion on this. So obviously a lot of investments require IP to protect the investments, and then the IP NFT is a great framework that's beginning to be used and understood in DeSci. Cameron, what are your thoughts on the IP NFT framework in terms of its scalability, its longevity of use, its current state, like this sort of thing? Because I know you guys obviously aren't Molecule, so you're not the ones who are creating the IP NFT, but you want to leverage it, and I think that's obviously an important part of the whole product of investing. So leveraging is the IP. So what are your thoughts there, Cameron, on terms of like what its current strengths are, what its current issues are, like where it's heading?
Yeah, I think the intellectual property NFTs are definitely something that is going to be a core backbone of DeSci. And as Molecule and those that are doing the legal innovation around it, they're going to be really helping to provide clarity, I think, for not only our users, but also institutions. Because this bridge between institutional involvement in science and community involvement, I think that's probably the crux of it all, to me at least, is this distribution of ownership using a fractionalized IP NFT across different parties. And I think back to the earlier question around, why I think why Web3 has essentially catalyzed our idea, was that not only are there community members interested and now actively involved in DeSci and contributing to DeSci for their own purposes, whether it be philanthropic or an interest in commercialization of research, but I think also institutions, from my background, are heavily experimenting with Web3. And in my background, I worked with a bunch of financial services institutions who were incubating Web3 projects and getting into cryptocurrencies, doing digital asset custody. So these large institutions, inclusive of research organizations, they're experimenting, they're building their capabilities, they're preparing for this digital future where you can custody different types of assets, inclusive of IP NFTs. So I think this world is moving in that direction, and it streamlines legal processes, it streamlines commercialization processes, different B2B arrangements that can be self-executed using smart contracts. I think that world is coming, and as we start to address some of the nuances, I think, with IP NFTs, which today are very much largely misunderstood, I believe, and not widely adopted. And I think there has been some little adoption from a university standpoint in the US, but we need to have some regulatory clarity, I believe, which might be the biggest blocker for us. And I think for Web3 at large, I actually believe what regulatory clarity is the biggest blocker, at least in the US. Now, internationally, I think in Europe, there's much more of a liberal approach that's been applied, more welcoming in nature. So I think regulation is probably going to be a very defining factor for all of Web3, inclusive of DeSci. So I think, regulation, adoption, we need to have further adoption. There needs to be standards developed. I mean, you all know this, but there are numerous standards organizations that are popping up around Web3, whether it be around wallets or how different institutions communicate on different networks with transactions. So there needs to be standards applied both at the organizational level as well as the legal level to provide that runway for adoption. Otherwise, we'll continue to run into challenges as an industry. But I'm confident, as I said, there's a lot of money being invested in figuring this stuff out. There are very smart people. We know the people at Molecule working on this. So we're really confident that there will be this clarity.
Yep. It's the regulatory compliance, regulatory clarity is, like you said, plaguing the entire industry, not just DeSci, but Web3 and decentralized tech in general. It is, as you mentioned, it is far worse in the US than in other places. But in the EU, whilst the MiCA regulation was it seemed quite nice, there are some things hidden in there that make, cross-border transactions and custodying your own funds, all these things quite difficult. Generally the system doesn't want the anti-system to thrive, which makes a lot of sense. But kind of back to what you said about this sort of B2B to C almost structure of allowing not just institutional, but sort of like retail investors to come in and invest in biotech or high-tech science projects. If we are in an unregulated space, obviously regulation is required and it will happen, but right now it is an unregulated space. And we're trying to conduct science, we're trying to invest into futurist projects and things with their own risks, potential X risks and everything, depending on which sort of lane you're going down. In this sort of world of B2B to C, direct to consumer investment, direct to consumer potential IP sort of generation, what do you, for me, I've got a lot of thoughts on this myself, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on like what sort of ethical considerations we should take in DeSci in particular, obviously Web3 at large, but in DeSci in particular, when going for this B2B to C structure in such an unregulated environment where the regulatory clarity isn't there and it's kind of the Wild West.
I'll jump on that. One thing I do want to state too is, so our inTheory funding platform that launches next month, it's at its launch, we're not going to claim any IP ownership or distribute any IP to the contributors to a project. At the very earliest days of this platform, it's a crowdsourced funding platform and a way for researchers to share their work in a visual and engaging way. Obviously, like Cam mentioned, we're following the IP NFT progress regulatorily and technically very closely, and we do want to integrate those in the future. But we're also always going to do that on an opt-in basis for researchers. Obviously, integrating an IP NFT into your work creates more of a funding incentive for other users, but we want to make sure that researchers of our platform always have full control and ownership over what they're doing, and can opt into an IP NFT or not. Obviously, also, if we're not claiming any ownership over IP and our users aren't claiming any ownership over IP, then it's much easier for us at this stage to work with researchers and projects that are funded through a university or possibly through government grants, and build partnerships and build integrations in that way, and then adapt those partnerships as the technology and regulations advance. So I want to make sure that that's clear. If a scientist wants to put their project on inTheory next month, once we hit our mainnet launch, there's not going to be any IP that needs to be relinquished or taken apart from your project. Cameron, I think you put your hand up.
Yeah, and to add on to that, which I think is very salient, the reason for that is for the reasons I mentioned. I think there's some clarity that's required before we start to embed IP NFTs as part of the platform. But our belief is that if we're able to onboard and provide this rich community of contributors as well as researchers and prove that and scale it, the IP NFT is a natural next step. Now, to your point on ethical considerations, I think there's two pieces for us, at least, that we're thinking about. Number one is choice. We want people to be fully aware of the choices that they make with respect to their intellectual property once we get to that point on our roadmap of allowing IP NFTs to exist. So there's clarity for people on how much of their IP they're willing to give up or give to the contributors or give to the community or give to inTheory. Also for contributors to be well aware of what the implications are of having ownership over those of that IP NFT. So I think choice is number one. I think we'll always stick to that to give people the option to relinquish IP or not, dependent on the incentives that we offer. Number two, ethically, is harmonization with existing rules and regulations around intellectual property in a multi-jurisdictional model. As you all are aware, we're working. Web3 is international by nature, so it's very difficult to essentially draw boundaries in Web3. So we want to be very careful around multi-jurisdictional compliance with intellectual property. There's varying laws and rules that apply. So we want to make sure that wherever we are engaging in intellectual property, tokenization, and distributing it to X number of users or researchers, we want to be very careful to be in congruence with those jurisdictional rules. So that's, I think, for me, you asked about ethics. I think that to me is the two that strike me as important.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the second one is probably going to be the hardest one because, as you mentioned, the regulatory environment is so unclear and it is always changing. But yeah, maintaining congruence with those existing regulations and especially jurisdictional is going to be really important. It does raise an interesting question, though. Just as a thought experiment, how do you jurisdictionally govern something like that when you're in the decentralized space?
Well, the one, I guess, silver lining you could say to operating in one of the stricter jurisdictions is that if you meet the requirements of your jurisdiction, you're likely to meet the requirements of many others.
That is true. It's like when you train anything, you train with the worst version of it, right? Like train drums with a big drumstick.
Yeah, exactly. Beyond that, you kind of see various approaches to protocols trying to, or not even protocols, but to companies trying to solve this problem. The most common seems to be a simple geofence, which is almost like it's just purely for show, really, because everyone and their dog can put up a VPN nowadays and get around a geofence. So, we do have a pretty extensive terms and conditions and FAQ on our site right now to try to make sure that we're answering all questions before they come up. And right now our approach is that anyone that's in an OFAC controlled country as declared by our government, right now can't participate in the platform. Fortunately, that list is quite low. And as we're able to decentralize the governance of the platform with a future token, we're hoping that we can remove that stipulation. But the balance is, as you're more centralized, you're more beholden to localized jurisdictions, and you move along that scale and hopefully remove some of those restrictions from yourself as you decentralize further. So that's our high level plan.
No, it's a pretty solid plan. Thank you for running through that. And so these are some of the sort of limitations and hurdles that probably the hardest ones to overcome for the platform, right? That's kind of what it seems like.
Yeah. And I don't think they're insurmountable at all. I don't think any of us do.
No, for sure.
We'd all be doing something else.
Yeah. If we all thought the regulation is going to get us, we wouldn't be here. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So those are the limitations and the hurdles, but let's talk about the other side of it, right? The other side of the coin. What about your platform, the user interface, the experience, how you sort of use it? What does that look like for communities and researchers that they wouldn't find elsewhere? That there's a reason to use your platform in particular.
Yeah, sure. I'll step back and kind of give a larger overview of the platform for anyone new that might have joined. But so inTheory, our DeSci funding platform that we're launching next month on mainnet, is a platform where researchers can really share their research with the world in a much more visual and engaging way than they might be able to on most traditional Web2 science platforms. And then users of the platform are able to learn about research, learn about its impacts, and send funding contributions directly to researchers by generating project-inspired digital artworks and minting those as NFTs. That generated artwork is then featured in our platform gallery, and that commemorates each funding contribution as really its own work of art. And what we're really trying to solve with inTheory is one, like we said earlier, we want to close the divide between the science community and the rest of the world by trying to make science cool and engaging again. I was a big fan of Bill Nye when I was a kid growing up, and I just loved his intro and science rules, slogan that always got me going. And we also want to help scientists and researchers tap into the financial opportunities really of the creator economy that has really so boomed in the last 5 years in a way that's low touch and doesn't really detract from their work. In my eyes, they're much more deserving of this type of financial inflow than most of today's TikTok stars. And we're especially targeting early career researchers and underrepresented groups that really need support that they're not getting from the traditional system. So, in the US, I point to things like the student debt crisis, which I know is a uniquely US issue. But I myself, I got my master's degree. I chose not to pursue my PhD because I didn't want to keep eating ramen and $2 meals for 3 more years. So if inTheory even is able to encourage one student to pursue that PhD and not have to take out student loans, then in my eyes it will be a success. So, when you first get into the platform, the very first thing you'll see is that we've tried to make things very visual. A lot of our design was influenced by current NFT art marketplaces. Again, in an effort to really appeal to the visual sense. And inTheory just wouldn't really work well with the sterile white colors that you see in a lot of Web2 science platforms. We also chose not to use any CSS frameworks for styling the platform. That was a conscious decision because it does feel like 90% of the internet uses the same collection of 3 or so CSS frameworks. So we want to do our best to look fresh and differentiate ourselves. To be determined on whether or not I'll have some UX designers screaming at me for our design or font choices, but I'm a fan of them, so that's enough for the moment.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of the blue and purple color scheme. It's great.
Great, thanks. And then once in the platform, users have the opportunity to explore a bunch of different research projects where they can learn about the project, about the researcher. They can see a nice visual radar graph of its potential impacts in the world. And then view the community art gallery, where basically each artwork is a receipt of a funding contribution to a different research project. And then there's also a Typeform application that takes about 25 minutes for any researcher to submit a project to be hosted on the platform. And so, once they find a project that they want to support, it's really easy. It's you just generate an artwork. You choose an art style and a color palette that you'd like to use for the generation of your artwork, and then it'll take keywords from the research itself to generate that piece of art. So each artwork really is unique to the actual contribution that's being made. And if you like the artwork, you can mint it as an NFT by contributing research money to the researcher in the form of USDC or CUSD. And so we're going to be live on mainnet, on Polygon, and on Cello next month.
Interesting. This is inTheory, right? Just to
Yeah.
double check.
Yes.
Yeah, great. So how do people interact with this? So I'm looking through your site and join the waiting list. So is that how people who are interested would be able to go and see?
Yeah, so right now on our site we have a link to access our beta version currently. Right now that is password protected only because all of our research projects on the platform at the moment are fictitious and they're generated by ChatGPT. And I don't want someone who doesn't know yet that we're not on main yet to go and explore and think that these are all real research projects. But if anyone here wants to access our beta platform, take a tour around, or if you're a researcher and you want to submit an application to be part of our launch cohort of projects, you can send me a message here on Twitter. You can send a message to our official Impact Finance Twitter, or you can sign up to our wait list and we can work things out from there. It's the password gating is going to be off within the next 3 weeks or so. We're just working to get some real projects on there first.
Okay, cool. So I'm just going to tweet out here inTheory.science, and then I'll tell people to reach out to you for private beta access.
Amazing. Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah. Cool. So I think it's a really great idea. This intersection between science and art is something that ourselves at DeSci World, we're also trying to push. I love the generative aspect of what you guys are doing. So do you have a particular model that generates it? Like, is it a chat? Is it a GPT model? What sort of model is it that's generating the art?
Yeah, we're using Dolly's API to generate the art.
Right.
And I do want to also state, I don't think generative art will ever replace human-made artworks. But what it does do is it does allow us to create kind of these new business models and workflows that were previously not possible. I mean, if we were to try to do this platform for every single funding contribution an artist was creating a piece of artwork as a receipt for this, it's just not possible. So I really just like the opportunities this opens up. But I also don't want it to to seem like we think that generative art is any way better or the future as compared to human generated artwork.
Yeah, that's a really nice disclaimer to put out, actually. Not that we would ever judge you here, but I think people would. So it's a good point to make that disclaimer. And whilst obviously, Luddite, you're going to embrace tech, it's also nice to maintain that human aspect.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's great. The user interface, that's why you've gone for the unique look. I think we share a lot of sentiment in DeSci World for trying to jazz up science a little bit, make it a bit more exciting for people to get involved into DeSci, show that new paradigm sort of aspect through the aesthetic pleasures just as much as the products we're building. So, put out the links. People, please go and interact with those links. But I did hear you mention earlier before, and we're sort of after the halfway mark, so I want to circle back to it. You said there would be a token. So can you let everybody know about what the thoughts are with your token here?
Yeah, sure. So in its current form, inTheory can operate without a token. However, there's obviously a glaring shortcoming with this, and that's that currently any project applications to put a project on inTheory are reviewed by us and our own centralized panel of advisors and PhDs, and that's not very DeSci at all. So obviously, we want to democratize this decision-making process into a DAO structure, and that would obviously need to be governed by a token. So that's certainly on our roadmap. And as I mentioned before, you'll notice that the platform name is inTheory, while our company name is actually Impact Finance, or IF, as we go by as well. And we did this because, like I said, we see inTheory as the first of a collection of related platforms. With the aim of directing funding towards different high impact causes in interactive and engaging ways. The longer term goal for us is to have all of these platforms be governed and connected by a single governance token, which I think really would allow for some really cool cross pollination of different disciplines and communities. So yes, there is a token on the roadmap. I guess I don't want to make any false promises on dates, but,
Sure.
but we are eyeing closer to the end of this year, but don't quote me on that.
No, sure, for sure. It's always good to hold back. Just quickly, one of the people in the audience right now has just mentioned that your DMs are turned off and they tried to reach out to you. So if you, after this call, want to turn them back on so that she can DM you.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Maybe that explains why no one talks to me.
That could be the case. Yeah. Honestly, make sure that's open so people can reach out
Yeah.
to you.
I'll switch that.
Cool. So you've mentioned this sort of Web3 native aspect of what you guys are building and why you're building it there, but have you guys formed any strategic partnerships of any kind with any Web2 entities?
Yeah, so no official partnerships at the moment. We have done a good amount of work with Cello and the Polygon ecosystems. I want to say too, we're actually still fully bootstrapped, and we haven't even actually attempted to raise any outside funding yet either. And so the last 2 months has been very hands to the keyboard for me, getting this thing actually up and going.
Sure.
We did receive some grants that have been instrumental to our success, including about $12,000 in Gitcoin's GR15. That was, really key for us to keep going.
Great.
And we're also a winner of Angel Block's startup grant program, which Angel Block is a decentralized investment platform for startups that just launched really just in the last month or two. So the awarding of that grant means that we're actually eligible to be one of the first projects that lists on Angel Block's protocol for decentralized startup investment, which we have that slated for later this year in the fall as well. And we did participate in the Cello Camp Incubator Program, where we received an innovation award and small grant from them as well, and just got an 8-week mentoring program that really helped us to find our product market fit and our go-to market strategy and build connections in the Cello space. So we would love to start building more partnerships and integrations with other players inside and outside of DeSci now that we have an actual platform up and running that works, and certainly would also love to have some DAO-led research projects in our first project cohort once we mainnet launch inTheory. So definitely reach out to me if you see a synergy, and I will make sure that my messages are receiving.
Yeah, sure. I'll also message you a few things afterwards about some potentials that we might be able to work together if you're sort of launching later this year. That's really great. So what is like success for inTheory at this point, right? What do you sort of see? A successful launch, yes, but it's like the first 6 months. What sort of usage are you expecting to get through? What sort of research are you hoping to get done? Who are you hoping to empower the most in that first sort of 6 months of launch?
Yeah, sure. I kind of touched on it before, but I said I think if we're even able to support a single graduate student or researcher to where they don't have to take out student loans to support their work, then in my eyes, inTheory will be a success even if we retire it that day. Obviously, I hope it gets a little bigger than that, in a larger scale. I'd love it if inTheory could go on to be really the go-to creators hub for researchers in Web3, and a tool that really encourages younger people to pursue science careers. Education, I think, is at a serious inflection point right now, and we'd love to be a part of that. And I think that the gamification of things like science education and the gamification of things like science contributions is going to be a big part of that as well. I was when I was like an 8-year-old, I was a big fan of the I think they were like Jumpstart for Kids computer games. I had one that you had to collect a bunch of different robots by learning about different science facts from history. And, as an 8-year-old, that was so instrumental for me to really starting to pursue a science career. And we want to have the same type of, engaging experience that's really current with the times for our users that might help to encourage, current undergraduates or high school students to also pursue that career.
Yeah, it's an awesome goal, the gamification of science. It's kind of like redefining what it means to be a scientist, right? So you've got this sort of traditional concept of a scientist, like even yourself, like don't mind me saying, like your profile picture, you would not seen like in the traditional idea of science, what the traditional scientist would look like. Everyone has this sort of like really outdated, stereotypical view of science from the uninitiated. But getting those uninitiated into science is because of that outdated view of what science is and how academia is working. In fact, some of it's justified. The gamification of it is a really important thing. I think also redefining this concept of what it is to be a scientist. So you got a scientist entrepreneur, right? Or a scientist explorer or something like this. And I think this entrepreneurial aspect is sort of slightly more exciting revamp of the word scientist is something that DeSci is bringing. Have you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we kind of began our first messaging really started this company was like enabling the citizen scientist, and really tearing down that image everyone has in their head of just the white lab coats, because that white lab coat image that, you know, most people have of scientists, I think really does facilitate a them and I type of mentality where it's like, oh, I've never worn a white lab coat like that, so I'm not a scientist, I can't be a scientist. And you know, that's really one of the things we wanted to break down from like the very earliest days, which, you know, is a reason for some of our more our louder design choices, and I guess break from the norm of the typical Web 2 science structure and design. I'm a big fan of you know, the platforms that came before us, like experiment.com. You know, they've helped generate, you know, $10 million or more worth of funding towards various citizen science projects, and we love that, and you know, we're really building on the shoulders of giants here, trying to move ideas like that into a Web3 and more visual and gamified world.
Yes, this open science concept. Cameron, I want to ask a question to you. So as someone who's sort of been on the outside of the science sphere, like myself, right, I've actually only the last 2 or 3 years really found out about open science as a movement and what it's up to and what it's been capable of. From like the outside perspective, like myself, Cameron, what is your thoughts on open science and how that might how DeSci improves on that model, and you know what we're doing in DeSci that they don't do in open science, that kind of the dichotomy between the two.
Yeah, I think DeSci, especially with what we're trying to do here, is I think engage the non-scientists, and this goes to what Brett was saying, you know, in augmentation of open science. I think where there is a huge opportunity is for bringing the community along for the journey of science. And what, you know, you had asked a question to Brett around what would be success, what does success look like with inTheory, and for me as the one non-scientist co-founder of this project is to bring the non-scientists along and allow non-scientists and scientists to have that dialogue on a platform that not only provides financial access and financial augmentation of doing research, but also allowing for that dialogue to take place in the communities to be developed. Because one of our theses earlier on was that science, while it should largely be driven by scientists, of course, in terms of its execution and ideation, it should be for the better good, the social good. So who better to ask for feedback and continue to refine ideas than the community itself? So I think with DeSci as the next step of this evolution of science is to allow for the non-scientists to learn about science, contribute, help to refine the way that science is conducted. And I think, you know, we're of the firm belief that the community, if incentivized properly, which, you know, we have on our roadmap to have these social channels as well as incentivization mechanisms to allow people to contribute and build ideas together. So that, to me, as the non-scientist founding member of this, is the success would be to have non-scientists contribute to how science is shaped by researchers on our platform, while of course adhering to, you know, the fact that, you know, there are people that are very qualified to conduct science, and, you know, the community feedback is important. But for me, those are the big things that stick out in terms of the success and the evolution of DeSci.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for saying that. I mean, your point about trying to onboard some of the non-scientists and help them to direct the way of science, I agree. I think that this sort of when you're sort of too close to something, then you can't see it for what it is. It's hard to see the bigger picture. And a lot of scientists who are too close to their research don't quite see some of the sort of secondary effects that their research is having on society. But having said that, I've said this myself a few times. but I can physically see the scientist's skin in the room crawl when I say we should have non-scientists directing science, because or helping with the sort of curation of science or the improvement of science. I see a lot of scientists in the room when I say that they do look like, do we really want to let you in? And I think that whole cultural paradigm is what's going to shift massively as well in this space. And it's going to be very exciting to have, alongside the aesthetic cultural differences, like your front end, our front end, but also these sort of social cultural differences as well, and how that's going to improve science. It's already kind of happening. I've met so many people who I would never have expected to meet doing science in this space, and it's kind of the new age of it.
I fully agree, and I think that one of my other favorite things about just the Web3 space in general is really the vast blending of different disciplines and industries. So, I mean, if you really want to be good in DeSci, you need an understanding of regulations. You need to have an understanding of financial primitives. You need to have an understanding of science in general. You need to have an understanding of scientific workflows, entrepreneurship. I mean, you need all of these things. It can no longer be a one-trick pony anymore to really succeed in this Web3 space. And I think that because of that, it will really help to push that perspective shift, because you can't do this by yourself anymore. Now you need a team that's a diverse team with multiple perspectives and multiple skills in order to be able to really succeed in this. And on a slightly more serious note, I also think that our best defense that we have against the rise of rampant AGI is the democratization and decentralization of it all. So I don't think that many AI researchers would agree vehemently with that, and because of that, I think that they'll be more open to this more welcoming culture of a larger audience participating in the scientific process.
Yep. Yeah, I think few people expect the future where AI is hoarded by a small subsection of humanity. I think everybody expects it to be open source. Whether or not that helps in the X risks or not is another question. But yeah, it's certainly something that we're going to have to keep track on, all of us, for the next decade or so. We're sort of nearing the 45-minute allotted time, but I've got a couple more questions to ask you. I do want to say, if anyone in the audience listening wants to talk, please raise your hand or request to speak, and we'll bring you up and you can ask these guys a question. I've got two more questions for you. The first one is, what can we expect to see from you on the inTheory, or the Impact Finance Greater roadmap?
Yeah, so obviously the biggest thing on the near-term horizon is our mainnet launch that, like I said, we have slated for next month. We're doing our beta testing right now. If anyone here on the call would like to participate as a beta tester, the testing process takes 20-25 minutes or so. You get a chance to tour the platform, get a look and feel for what it's like to use the platform. But we also, like I mentioned before, we haven't taken on any outside investment yet. And we built the whole thing internally. So if you have any feedback on during the beta testing process, we can implement it without asking for approval and without needing to go to some third-party dev team. We can make your changes realized pretty instantly. So if you really do want to have a good influence on the platform and how it looks and how it exists at launch, then certainly participate as a tester. Beyond that main net launch, we also, like I said, we do want to really focus on making the platform more interactive and making the process of funding science more interactive. So we want to implement things like contributor leaderboards, digital trophy rooms where you can showcase the artworks and your contribution receipts to the world, and various other things like possibly implementing 3D art or 3D avatars that allow you to create something that really represents your contributions to science in a digital way. Slightly beyond that as well, we've been really excited by the progress that the HyperCerts team has made, led by the folks at Protocol Labs. And I was on a community call with them this week, actually, and their SDK looks like it's almost ready for projects to integrate HyperCerts into their platform. They really, the only thing they're missing right now is technical documentation. So we're really excited by the progress of where that project is at right now. And for anyone who isn't aware, the goal of a HyperCert is to create a kind of a new financial primitive for funding public goods, like science, for example. really in an effort to turn philanthropic and regenerative efforts into a more tangible and tradable asset class. There's a little bit more to it than that, but I'm sure they explain it better on their website. But we would love it if our contributions to projects on our platforms also minted the users a hypercert that really serves as a verifiable stamp of the impact that they've created. So we do have a lot of plans on the horizon, on the roadmap. I guess it's now a matter of gathering user feedback from our earliest researchers, earliest supporters, seeing what to prioritize first.
Yep. It's so you just mentioned the beta test, so recommend everybody here to go and test that out, help them out. So apart from that, this is my second question: what can the community at large and DeSci World in particular, what can we do to sort of assist you guys in your journey at the moment?
Spread the word. Certainly, we are onboarding our first cohort of research projects. So if you know anyone or you yourself are conducting research actively, we'd love it if you would get in contact with us or submit an application to have your project hosted on our platform at launch. As I mentioned earlier, in this stage, we don't ask for any IP or any ownership of any of the work that you're doing for us or for our community members or contributors. So it's purely a place for you to share your work in a visual manner and collect some supplementary income from crowdsourced funding. So we'd love to talk to you if you're doing some research and you'd like to have your project on our platform. Share the word with anyone you know that might also be interested. And beyond that, follow our socials, keep an eye on our launch date. And I did mention a little bit earlier too, we are going to be one of the first projects to actually do a fundraise through Angel Block's decentralized startup investment protocol. And we have that planned for this fall. So again, just follow us on socials. We keep you up to date on the latest news on how you could possibly participate in that as well.
Yeah, we'll make sure to signal boost all of the stuff as it comes through.
Amazing.
So follow both pages and you'll be able to get all the information you need there. Again, just before we end up, if anyone wants to say anything or ask anything, please feel free to ask to speak and we can bring you up. But Cameron, Brett, I want to just thank you both for coming through and for telling us all about impact finance and inTheory. It sounds really, really awesome. I think there's a lot of collaboration potentials for not just with DeSci World, but the general DeSci space projects and researchers and individuals. So really looking forward to seeing how that happens. I wonder if you have any thoughts on a conference circuit. Are you guys going to be anywhere in real life anytime this year that we can sort of meet up with you?
I certainly hope so. We haven't put anything down in permanent marker yet on the books, but we really tribute a lot of where we're at today to our visit to DeSci Day at ETH Amsterdam almost exactly a year ago today, actually.
Yeah.
That was really great for helping us meet the community and kind of throw some things at the wall, see what sticks, what doesn't stick. So now that we have something that's actually operational, yeah, we'd love to disguise our itch for travel as a business
Sure.
expense.
Well, I mean, look, we haven't announced it officially yet. It's going to come on Monday, but DeSci World is actually hosting our own event called the World of DeSci, and we're hosting it in Belgrade in Serbia during the ETH Belgrade weekend in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd of June. So
Wow.
that would be something we would love, honored to have you there. You can do a product demo, do a workshop, do some recruitment of local researchers, local industry, and we can talk about that. No problem if you're interested.
I love it. Let me check my finances, but I think we're in.
Well, if you are interested to go back to ETH Dam, that is 10 days prior in ETH Dam.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you could do Dam, you could do Block Split, which is 2 days after that. If you wanted to, you could go to ETH Napoli, which is 2 days after that, and then 2 days after that is ETH Belgrade. So we'll be in Belgrade, but you could do the whole of the Eastern European continent if you wish.
That sounds incredible. My girlfriend will be upset with you for suggesting all of that, but
well, you could take her to Napoli. She'd be happy with that, surely.
Yeah, right, you're right.
Cool. Cameron, it was a real pleasure meeting you too. If there's anything you want to say, please say.
Yeah, thank you. I think these sorts of dialogues, like what Brent mentioned, got us into this space, and we're always happy to be a part of these conversations, and really appreciate all the questions and for everyone joining. I think we're lots of exciting stuff coming up in the next month or so, and we'll look out for you all to reach out to us to hopefully get involved in beta testing or refer any interested researchers that want to be a part of our first cohort. So thank you all.
Yes, absolutely.
The last thing I'll say is that I did change my privacy settings on my direct messages. So if you want to directly DM me, we don't have to be connected first. So would be happy to hear
Aisha,
from
there you are. You can DM now.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you guys again. Like I said, if anyone has any questions, follow-up questions, you can now DM Brett, you can DM us, we can connect you. And hopefully we'll see you guys all over there on the beta test.
I love it. Thank you so much to everyone who attended, and thanks Joshua for stepping in for Jelani, and send Jelani our best.
All good. Yeah, I will do. Cheers, Brett. Cheers, Cameron. Thanks everybody else.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.